Did you know that in a recent poll, 61% of renters said they didn't think they would ever be able to afford a home? Many people are quick to blame the current interest rates, which reached their highest peak in 2 decades last fall. But then there are others who say, hey, in the 1980s, we had 18 or 19% interest rates. This is nothing. So who's right? The 1980s housing market was a whole different ballgame. And in this video, I'm going to show you why. Home ownership is part of the very fabric of the American dream. So to understand what's going on and why some people are finding the American dream so elusive right now, we need to take a look at some data over time. But a quick heads up. There are a lot of statistics available out there, and well, sometimes it's hard to know which ones are the right ones. I've chosen what I find to be the most commonly available ones, but I don't have a time machine to go back in time and poll everyone to make sure that this data is correct. So bear with me. It's very, very common nowadays to hear older people, realtors, lenders point out that in the 1980s, interest rates were as high as 18 or 19%. So why are you having trouble buying a home? It was so much worse back then, right? You can't really blame them though. It's been preached to us in the news. But in reality, today's home buyers are actually facing a lot more difficulty, even than the 1980s buyers. So let's jump back all the way to 1970. In 1970, the median income was $9,870. The median house price was about $17,000. Most people rented for 2.6 years before buying, and the average home buyer age was about 30. In 1970, you could buy a home for about 1.72 times your annual single income salary. Home ownership was in pretty easy reach. It didn't really make that much sense to rent. HOAs weren't really common yet, so you didn't have that additional financial strain. And property taxes were fairly low, also incentivizing home ownership. Now we're going to jump ahead to the 1980s, and things started to get a little ugly. The average home price in just 10 years had jumped to $47,200. And the median income was about $21,000. So the price to income ratio is now 2.25, and it actually jumped to 3.7 times in that decade. Along with that, interest rates jumped up to 18 or 19% at the peak in that decade. The average home buyer was around 30 years old still, but they were renting for a bit longer, about 5 years. And check out this news clip from 1982. Tell me this doesn't sound familiar.
It's no secret that the real estate industry has been one of the big losers in these recessionary times. Sales of new and old homes are off 50% from the peak in 1978. The cause for all this, well, it's well known: high interest rates. And the blame realtors say should be laid on the lap of Congress. Already 18 days overdue on a budget resolution for next year, the representatives are locked in a bitter battle over how much more the government will spend over what it takes in.
The budget deficit must be cut under $100 billion and must be brought into balance within 3 to 4 years.
I've been mentioning the price to income ratio. So they say a healthy price to income ratio is about 2.6. This means that it would take 2.6 years of the median income to purchase the median home. But we haven't had a 2.6 price to income ratio since the 1990s. This figure is important because it's a gauge of how long it will take the median home buyer to save up to buy a home, and it kind of indicates whether or not they'll be able to afford their monthly payments. So with that information in mind, let's take a look at what's going on today. Right now, the average home buyer is 42 years old. In fact, the average first-time home buyer in 2024 is now 35 years old. The real median household income from today is roughly $75,000. Again, there's a lot of different figures floating around out there. And the median home price is $420,000. So do you see why our buyers are older? It's because home prices are now 5.6 times income. Take a look at this map, which shows 1980 prices at a price to income ratio of about 3. And as we slide this bar across, it shows year on year how the affordability crisis has spread across various metro areas until we reach today. Now you'll see the map, most of the map turns yellow, or a lot of the map turns yellow, indicating a price to income ratio of between 5 and 8. And parts of California are now over 10. So if we go back to what I mentioned as the healthy ratio being 2.6 times, this means that your home should cost 2.6 times what you're making. If the average home price this year is $420,000, you should be making $161,000. Or if you're making $75,000, you should be buying a $195,000 house, which, at least in my market, really doesn't exist. So now let's return to my original point about the interest rates. Remember, in the 1980s, we had the horrific interest rates of 18 or 19% as they were battling inflation in that decade. So let's look at all these numbers that I've just given you, but let's adjust them for inflation so that we can compare them more easily. So I'm going to use the Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculator to make these adjustments. So in 1970, the average salary was $9,870. And in today's money, that's more like $80,000. The $17,000 house from 1970, adjusted for inflation, is about $137,000. 1980's $21,000 income in today's money is about $80,000 also. That $47,200 house is about $180,000. Today's median income, well, again, we're just going to use the figure that I found, is about $75,000, and the median home price is about $420,000, as we already talked about. So this lays it out pretty clearly, but if we look at monthly payments, that's another way to kind of judge this. So if I use the 1980s figures adjusted for inflation, the home price is $180,000. Even with an 18% interest rate, it would cost you about $2,400 per month. But the big thing is your down payment that you're required to have is $36,000, right? That's the 20% down, which most people want to try to put down. So you would have to save up $36,000, which at your adjusted income of $80,000 is manageable. Now, if we look at today, we have that median home price of $420,000. That will require you to save up $84,000 to put down that same 20%. And your monthly payment, even with, I think I used a figure of 7% interest rate, is coming out to about $2,800 per month. And that 20% down is going to be really painful because it's now equaling or even more than the median income. Today's buyers have other pressures to contend with, such as HOAs, homeowners associations. We didn't really have them in 1980, at least not as many as today. If you look at this graph, it says there were 36,000 HOAs nationwide in the 80s. This is from the Foundation for Community Research. Today, there are 10 times that number. Now, homeowners associations are, of course, going to play a larger role in certain states than in others. In Florida and in California, we have about 50,000 HOAs in each of those states, and that's not going to be the case everywhere. And the fees range greatly also, depending on the amenities. For instance, if you have a gated community with a guard sitting there, you'll pay several $100s a month to live in that HOA. If you don't have any amenities, it might be several $100s per year. That can vary widely, and that's a personal choice too. So you do have the opportunity to opt out of an HOA and not purchase a home in an HOA. But HOAs, especially in Florida, that's a topic for its own video. Homeowners insurance is another cost that I'm sure is more than it was in 1980. And I also couldn't even find if it was mandatory in 1980. Nowadays, if you have a mortgage, you have to have homeowners insurance. I don't know that that was the case in 1980. Homeowners insurance costs have jumped up about 20% over the past 2 years and are expected to rise another 6% in 2024. The average home insurance cost soared to $1,905 in 2023 from $1,272 in 2019. That's a 50% increase. And I want to point this out. Surprisingly, this isn't reflected in our inflation data, which I think is really interesting. The CPI only considers renters insurance. If homeowners insurance were included, the inflation rate would have been 4.11% in 2023, up by 0.7 percentage points over the official data. I couldn't find data for how much insurance cost in 1980, but when it was brand new in 1950, it was $100 for a 5-year policy. That would be great, wouldn't it? So mortgage rates have dipped a bit in the past couple of weeks, but we're still waiting for home prices to kind of follow suit. And it remains a challenging market, especially for first-time home buyers. Our younger buyers are trying hard to save for their down payment, build up their credit score, and our older buyers are hanging on to their large homes. And also, many people aren't really willing to give up their low interest rate. Some people have as low as, 2.5%, 3%. That's hard to want to get rid of. In many states, not where I'm located in Florida, but in many states, inventory remains very, very low, and that keeps the prices up also. So keep your eye on Florida because our inventory is definitely higher, and we're waiting to see what happens with prices. Real estate is hyper local, but in my market, our inventory is up 60% over June of 2023. That's across the whole state. So if you are a first-time home buyer or a young person trying to buy a home and the older people around you are saying, I don't understand what your problem is. It's not that bad. It's not the 18 or 19% that we faced in the 1980s. Hopefully this video will help you set the record straight with them. Even though our 80s home buyers went through a period of crazy interest rates trying to curb inflation, it's still not the same as today. Another thing to keep in mind is that those interest rates can be renegotiated, but the purchase price, that's a one-time thing. What you've paid is what you've paid. You can refinance down the road when you have a bad interest rate. So 80s buyers could get out of that in the 90s by refinancing. Nowadays, the purchase price being up higher, well, you're kind of stuck. My name is Krista Tarrans, and I'm a realtor in the Central Florida area, and I've been selling real estate since 2009. If you'd like to reach out to me, as many have already, my contact information is always below these videos. Feel free to jump on there and set up a time to talk to me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.